In 1891, a letter was found beneath a floorboard, blood-stained, unsigned, and ending with 4 words, "Don't trust the doctors. They tell you history is written by the victors." But that's not true. History is buried by them. What you're about to hear isn't just a tale, it's a fracture in the facade, a rip in the surface of your reality, a place most men never dare to look into, because what stares back, it knows your name. Thornhill Asylum was built in 1873 under the guise of mercy, a psychiatric institution meant to heal the broken. But behind its walls, the only thing being mended was control, not of minds, but of truth. It started with experiments. Then records began disappearing. Then families. Then entire patients. You see, Thornhill wasn't an asylum. It was a vault, a holding chamber for those who saw too much, wives accused of hysteria, men who spoke of shadows behind the government, children who dreamed in ancient languages they had no way of knowing. Every last one of them was silenced, drugged, shackled, until their voices became whispers, and then nothing. But here's the thing they never planned for. Some of the inmates remembered. There are hidden journals, coded symbols scratched beneath beds, and voices recorded on wax cylinders that were never supposed to be played again. And in all of them, one truth. The doctors weren't healing us. They were programming us. This isn't just about Thornhill. It's about what Thornhill was a test for. And if you think this was isolated, then you're already under the spell they perfected in those halls. We're about to walk into a corridor of history that was designed to be forgotten. But we remember, keep watching, because once you hear what they buried beneath Thornhill, you'll never trust silence again. Every institution has a face, but Thornhill had a mask. The official records say the asylum's chief architect was a man named Alaric Dunn, a quiet, reclusive figure who vanished months after construction. What they don't tell you is that Dunn was never an architect, not by training, not by trade. Before Thornhill, he designed prisons. Before that, occult cathedrals across Europe, each aligned with constellations, burial sites, and ancient pagan codes. Every one of his buildings was a map, a ritual blueprint. He was obsessed with sound frequencies, claimed certain tones could open memory or erase it. The floor plan of Thornhill wasn't functional, it was ritualistic. A spiral corridor that disorients. Windows placed to block sunlight precisely during solstices. Rooms shaped to echo human cries at specific frequencies that wear down resistance over time. Every brick had purpose. Every hallway was a spell. And above the central chamber, room 39, they built a copper dome. Not for light, not for beauty, but for containment. To trap something that had been awakened by mistake. Whispers from the early patients said the room vibrated at night. They'd hear languages in their dreams, tongues no one had spoken for 2,000 years. Patients would wake up reciting words they'd never learned. Symbols appeared in blood beneath their fingernails. Was this madness? Or was Thornhill a beacon pulling something in? The staff started going mad first. One nurse locked herself in the laundry vault and sewed her own lips shut. A groundskeeper gouged out his own eyes and claimed he'd seen what the dome was hiding. And yet, the reports stopped. Not because the horror ended, but because someone higher up wanted it to continue undisturbed. They shut it down. Not to save anyone, but to preserve the experiment. Dunn's journals were never recovered, but one torn page surfaced in a private estate, sale in 1963. It simply read, "Thornhill is the first. There will be more. The shape must be remembered. The silence must speak." And if that's true, then Thornhill wasn't a mistake. It was a template, a prototype for psychological architecture, a place where fear and obedience are hardwired into stone. And if Thornhill was the first, where are the others? Comment below with, "The shape must be remembered." Write it twice to lock your awareness and show the algorithm you see behind the veil. In most asylums of the 19th century, the patients are forgotten, but at Thornhill, they refused to disappear quietly. They weren't insane, they were inconvenient, and some were brilliant. Among the earliest recorded inmates was a man named Jonathan Greaves, a schoolteacher arrested after claiming his students were being prepared for something. His words, not mine. He said there were patterns in their textbooks, phrases that triggered behavioral changes. His crime? He removed the books and burned them. By sundown, he was in Thornhill. But Greaves didn't go quietly. He carved messages into his skin. He spoke in reverse Latin, and before they silenced him, he uttered a phrase to the chaplain, one that would later appear on a wall in room 12, scratched by another patient 6 years later. The doors are illusions. The real cage is the mind. That same year, a 14-year-old girl was admitted. No name, no family, just a note, uncontainable. She never spoke aloud, but she drew symbols, thousands of them, each matching glyphs from dead languages, Sumerian, Phoenician, and something older. The staff dismissed it as schizophrenia until those drawings were found replicated perfectly in a cave system beneath Thornhill that no one had explored in centuries. How did she know? Then came Dr. Abram Locke, the asylum's chief psychiatrist. He began noticing it too. Patients from different backgrounds, languages, and decades, drawing the same symbols, whispering the same chants, reacting violently to the same frequency of bells. He wanted to publish his findings. He vanished the next day. But the patients? They kept going. Those who weren't sedated began organizing, not through spoken word, but by humming the same tone every night at precisely 2:13 a.m. For months. Until one night the tone stopped. That same night, a fire broke out in Wing C. The source was never found. But in the ashes, they found an iron key, wrapped in human hair, and on it, carved in microscopic etching, the phrase, "We're not trapped, we're testing them." Let that sink in. The patients weren't the victims, they were the observers. Thornhill wasn't just studying madness, it was baiting something to react. And whatever it was reacting. Every asylum has secrets. But Thornhill had a room that wasn't supposed to exist. It didn't appear on any blueprints, no key, no lock, no door from the inside. And yet multiple patients described it in perfect detail before they were ever told it existed. They called it the still room. Not because it was quiet, but because time didn't move in there. According to scattered reports and confiscated journals, patients who entered the still room returned, changed. Some forgot how to speak. Others forgot who they were. A few never returned at all. But the ones who did, they brought something back. One nurse, in her final letter before her suicide, wrote, "They stare at the walls now, even when there's nothing there. One man weeps for a family he never had. One woman insists she's still 6 years old, even though she's 93. Another just repeats the phrase, 'He is still breathing beneath the floor.'" Researchers decades later discovered evidence of a sealed chamber beneath Thornhill's east wing. No entry point, no stairs, just solid earth disturbed long ago with strange magnetic interference above it. The lead investigator quit. He claimed he was being followed. He said his dreams were being hacked. "There's something alive in there," he wrote, "but not human. Not now." Some speculate that the still room was a sensory deprivation chamber. Others believe it was an experiment in psychological collapse, an early form of mind-wipe technology using vibration and color starvation. But the truth is worse. Because in 1893, a priest visited Thornhill unannounced, not to perform a blessing, but to perform a binding. He carried only 3 things, a candle, a Latin manuscript, and a vial of human blood. He never left the building. And later that week, 3 patients slit their wrists and wrote the same Latin word in their blood on the floor. Memoriae. Translatio, so of memory. They weren't afraid of dying, they were afraid of forgetting, of being wiped, erased, turned into empty vessels for someone or something else. This wasn't a hospital. This was a proving ground. And if the still room was real, then so is what it was trying to contain. You ever wonder why certain stories disappear, why certain buildings are just condemned and left to rot? Because some truths aren't erased, They're hidden in plain sight. In Thornhill's final year of operation, 1895, communications began to fail. Letters went undelivered, telegram lines dropped, logs stopped being updated. But inside the asylum, something else was happening. A network was forming. Not between doctors, not between guards, but between the patients. They called it the Whisper Network. By the time administrators noticed, it was too late. Patients were communicating entire messages without speaking a single word. Morse code through finger tapping, eye-blinking sequences timed to ward schedules. Even dreams began to sync, men and women across different wards waking up screaming the same name, Benedictus. Who, or what, was Benedictus? No one outside the asylum had heard the name, but a single file, misfiled under cultural superstitions, described it as a voice older than language, a watcher buried in silence. It does not speak. It unmakes. Soon after, drawings of a figure began appearing in patient cells. Not a demon, not a man. Something in between, blindfolded, arms stretched outward, hands pierced with ink-black nails. Over 40 separate patients drew identical versions, without ever seeing each other. That's when the removals began. Night after night, patients were taken from their beds and never returned. Some say it was the doctors cleaning house, but one orderly left a letter claiming the removals weren't human-led. "We stopped giving injections," he wrote. "They stopped needing them. They walked willingly, smiling, as if something had spoken inside them and rewritten who they were." And in the final days, the walls bled. Not metaphorically, literally. Visitors during Thornhill's last inspection reported seeing red fluid dripping from edited tone blocks. When they tried to analyze it, the samples vanished. So did the inspectors. 3 men, never seen again. And in their place, new blueprints, new funding, new locations across the country. Because Thornhill wasn't shut down, it was replicated. And if the Whisper Network survived, it didn't die with those patients. It evolved, it adapted, it digitized. They no longer need stone walls. They have glass screens. You're not watching this video, you're being watched through it. Every haunted place has a sound, creaking floors, rusted hinges. But Thornhill had something different. A tone, low, constant, inaudible to some, but unbearable to others. They called it the Thornhill frequency. It wasn't mechanical. It didn't come from the pipes or the walls or the wind. It came from beneath. Patients would cover their ears, screaming about a hum they couldn't escape. Doctors dismissed it as auditory hallucination. But staff started hearing it too. One orderly ruptured his own eardrums with a spoon. A nurse gouged out her ears with knitting needles. They all said the same thing before they snapped. "It won't stop until I obey." The frequency didn't just torment, it altered. Psychologists now believe it operated on a subharmonic range that interacts with the brain's theta waves, the frequency of hypnotic suggestion, memory recall, and trauma encoding. In other words, Thornhill wasn't just breaking minds, it was reprogramming them. Records show that in 1894, a device was secretly installed in the eastern wing. No manufacturer, no schematics, just a lead casing, copper wires, and a tuning fork-like structure pointing straight down into the earth. The name on the only known memo: Project Oubliette. French, a dungeon accessible only through a trap door, a place to forget. But the purpose wasn't to forget, it was to implant. And here's where it gets worse. In 1952, after Thornhill was sealed and abandoned, a local radio station operating within 10 miles reported bizarre interference. A repeating tone followed by whispers in Latin. They shut down within 72 hours. Every technician on staff later suffered from identical symptoms: insomnia, paranoia, nosebleeds, then silence. Not death, not madness. Just silence. No speech. No movement, as if they were waiting for another signal. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in silence and thought a thought that was entirely your own? Not suggested, not implanted, not triggered by a tone you didn't even hear. You think you're free? You think your choices are your own? Then explain why, as you listen to this, your heart is beating faster. And part of you doesn't want to stop watching, even though everything in your gut says you should. That's the Thornhill frequency. It's not dead. It's not gone. It's here, and it's already inside you. Surveillance is nothing new. But Thornhill wasn't just observed, it observed you back. In 1891, patients began reporting the feeling of being watched, not by guards or doctors, but by something within the walls. They called them the Watchers Without Eyes. No face, no features, just a presence that followed, that listened, that knew. At first, these were dismissed as hallucinations. Until Dr. Elias Crane, a neurologist hired to study the asylum's rising incidence of synchronized psychosis, noticed something chilling. Multiple patients, across separate wings, described identical dreams. A long, windowless corridor, a door that opened by itself, and behind it, an eye with no iris, no pupil, just reflection. He sketched what they described. He compared them. They matched, perfectly. And then he looked closer. Buried within the shading of the pupil in one drawing was a code, not random lines, structured, symmetrical, ancient. It mirrored an early Sumerian sigil for divine sight, a symbol once used in temple rituals to summon that which cannot be unseen. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. Behind mirrors in the patient quarters, he found microscopic carvings, thousands of them, etched by something, not human. When light passed through them at the right angle, they cast shapes onto the floor, shapes that matched the symbols drawn in blood during the Thornhill fire. But only at certain times of day. When the sun hit at precisely 3:33 p.m., that's not coincidence. That's a trigger. "We are being trained," Crane wrote in his final report. "Not to think, but to obey. The eyes we fear are not mechanical. They are ritualistic. We are not being watched to be judged. We are being watched to be aligned." And then, Crane vanished. The only thing left was his journal. The final line: "They don't need to record what you see. They only need you to see them. Because so you do, they become real." Have you ever felt it? That cold presence when you're alone in a room. The weight behind your eyes when you wake up at 3 a.m. The sense that something else just blinked from inside you. That's not fear. That's recognition. Every asylum has a forbidden wing. In Thornhill, it was Wing G, unmarked, unmapped, unmentioned in every public document. But it existed. Because sometimes silence is the loudest confession. Wing G was sealed with iron, not wood. The door welded shut, the hallway bricked in, and the only known entry through the incinerator shaft which, according to records, was never meant for actual use. But here's where the story fractures into something darker. In 1892, during an inspection by the Massachusetts Board of Health, one investigator named Dr. Ezra Mallin became obsessed with a name that kept appearing in the logs. Patient 001, claimed immortal. Every mention was crossed out, redacted, but still, traces remained. The entry said, arrived without records, estimated age 47, speaking fluent Aramaic and a dialect of Old Norse. Unharmed by sedatives, unresponsive to pain. Eye contact causes temporary aphasia in staff. Housed in Wing G, isolation mandatory. Mallin demanded access. He was denied, so he broke in. They found him 2 days later in the sanitarium chapel, naked, head shaved, having carved a spiral of Latin phrases into the pews with his own teeth. He'd bitten through wood, and in his hand, a locket. Inside, a drawing of a man with no face, just a black void. Behind him, the words, "He remembers before memory." The patient was never seen, but his presence infected the records. Letters from staff describe hearing chanting. in multiple voices at once, all from Wing G. Lights would dim. Candles would go out. Shadows didn't behave. They bent toward the sealed door. One nurse went mad trying to describe the figure she saw staring through the cracks. Not alive, not dead, not human. It spoke my father's voice. My father died when I was 6. Some now believe that Wing G wasn't holding a man, it was containing an archetype. A primordial concept made flesh, something older than language, older than history, something that wears human memory like a costume, feeding off it, rewriting it. And here's the worst part. When Thornhill shut down, Wing G was never sealed from the outside. It was sealed from within, which means, whatever's in there, let us seal it, because it wanted to wait. And now, it might not be waiting anymore. When Thornhill Asylum burned in 1895, the official cause was listed as faulty gas lines, but the logs tell another story, because 3 nights before the fire, the asylum was locked down. No staff were allowed to leave. No patients were moved. And the chapel, once disused, was reopened. It began with chanting, low, monotone. From beneath the building, deep in the foundation, where the original builders had sealed off a sub-basement no one was supposed to know existed, but someone remembered, and they reopened it. The ritual is never described directly, but fragments exist, in scorched documents, journals that escaped the flames, and in the final letter from Dr. Corwin Mays, the last man known to step inside the chapel alive. They brought 13 patients into the circle. Each was chosen for a trait: obedience, rage, lust, silence, guilt, hunger, grief, vision, ecstasy, blindness, laughter, violence, and stillness. They believed these were the facets of the human door, that when arranged properly they could open something beyond memory, beyond time, beyond God. He goes on to say the floor was painted in ashen blood, symbols spiraled outward from a copper basin that never emptied. And as the chanting rose, something answered. Not with a sound, with a pull. Like gravity shifting sideways, like reality slipping for just a moment. Mays wrote, the air folded in on itself, like breath, inhaling backwards. One of the patients opened his mouth and a third voice came out, ancient, metallic and terrified, not angry, not wrathful, terrified, of what we had become. And then the fire began, not from outside, but from the walls themselves. Witnesses said the stone bled flame, that shadows caught fire, that screams came not from throats, but from the floors. And in the end, only one figure was seen walking away, barefoot, covered in soot, clutching a human tooth in each hand. That figure was never identified, but reports of a man matching his description appear across the eastern US for the next 40 years, always near government buildings, always on the day of lunar eclipses. You think this was just a ritual? It was a birth canal. Thornhill didn't summon something, it midwifed it. And if that ritual worked, then the flame didn't destroy Thornhill, it freed it. When Thornhill burned, it should have ended there. But secrets that deep don't burn, they scatter. Within 48 hours of the fire, federal agents arrived, not firefighters, not rescue teams, not coroners, agents, unmarked carriages, foreign uniforms, and one man, described by witnesses as tall, thin, completely bald, and wearing gloves stitched with non-Roman letters. He never spoke, he only pointed. Everything, every log, every body, every stone, was carted away in sealed crates. Witnesses were paid off, threatened, or institutionalized, and from that moment forward, Thornhill was wiped from history, but not erased, because the government didn't destroy the remains, they classified them. The operation had a name, not cleanup, not containment. They called it Ash Protocol. A single-page document, declassified for less than 12 hours in 1982, described it as the redirection of emergent spiritual trauma into state-sanctioned psychological conditioning programs. Read that again. They took what happened at Thornhill and turned it into a blueprint. In 1901, a new asylum appeared in Connecticut, Same layout. In 1915, another in Illinois. By 1933, they'd stopped calling them asylums and started calling them research facilities. What were they researching? Behavioral shifts, memory manipulation, obedience under duress, and most importantly, the control of perception. Because if you can shape what a man believes is real, you don't have to chain him. You let him chain himself. And here's the part no one talks about. The Ash Protocol didn't stop with buildings. It moved into curriculums, media, advertising, even religious institutions. Tiny pieces of Thornhill, phrases, tones, symbols, buried in everyday language. Ritual reduced to repetition. Belief shaped by exposure. That's how you turn an asylum into a society. Because Thornhill never ended. It scaled, and now, the cell isn't a room. It's your screen, your scroll, your algorithm. Ask yourself, why does silence make you uncomfortable now? Why do you reach for your phone when you're alone? Why do you dream of people you've never met saying words you don't remember learning? Ash didn't burn us. It programmed us. The Thornhill fire took 71 lives officially, but 13 patients were never accounted for. No bodies, no names, no closure, just vanished. They became known, quietly, as the broken mouths. Not because they screamed, but because after escaping they never spoke again, not a single word. Some were found miles away, wandering highways barefoot, with symbols etched into their skin like tattoos. Others reappeared in churches, standing motionless in front of altars for hours, eyes open, mouths sealed with dried blood. What happened to them inside that building? We only know because of one man, Emmett Vale, patient ID 667B, admitted for persistent prophetic hallucinations and delusions of time displacement. He believed he was living backwards, that every day was yesterday, that Thornhill was the end of something old returning to begin again. He survived the fire. He escaped. He didn't run. He went underground, literally. For decades, he lived beneath an abandoned train depot in New Jersey, scribbling notes in charcoal on concrete, pages and pages, thousands of them, now archived in a vault known only to a few researchers. And in those pages, he described what the broken mouths experienced. We weren't patients, we were receivers. The voices didn't come from above, they came from underneath. Thornhill isn't just a building, it's a mouth, and it fed on memory. And we were the teeth. Vale claimed the fire wasn't started to destroy the asylum. It was started to seal it, to cauterize the wound left open by the ritual. But for the broken mouths, the ritual never stopped. They carried it with them, in their blood, in their breath, in the patterns they traced in dirt when they thought no one was watching. Some of us wake up humming tones we've never heard, Vale wrote. Some of us bleed from the ears when the moon is full. Some of us hear his name in static. And he were to. And that one day, when enough of them had gathered, they would remember it all. Every whisper, every symbol, every command. And when they did, they would no longer be broken mouths. They would speak, not for themselves, but for what watches beneath. After the fire, the official story dissolved like ash. But behind the scenes, there was a quiet scramble, not by journalists, not by grieving families, but by a secretive clerical unit known as the Order of St. Malleus, a name that appears nowhere in Vatican archives, unless you know how to look. They called themselves Protectors of the Folded Veil. Their mission? To contain what Thornhill had awakened, and they had failed, badly. The first clue to their involvement came in the form of a charred relic found deep beneath the wreckage, under the chapel floor. It was a crucifix, upside down, welded into a ring of copper and bone. Etched on the back were words in Latin, vox non humana, voice not human. The investigators who uncovered it were never seen again. Their van was found a week later at the edge of a forest in Pennsylvania, doors open, tape recorder running. All it captured was breathing, not human breathing, wet, guttural, rhythmic, like lungs expanding in water. But here's where things turn colder. Archived letters, dated 1907, were uncovered in a private collection belonging to Father Émile Rochefort, an exorcist turned heretic. He had been stationed at Thornhill in its early days, and warned of a threshold in the basement no one was to ever open. He wrote of a mirror no one could look into twice, of patients waking up with tongues they didn't have the night before, of hymns sung backward in perfect harmony by children who couldn't read. Rochefort pleaded for the asylum to be shut down, but instead, he was transferred. Silenced, vanished. The Order of St. Malleus returned to Thornhill 14 years after the fire. Not to investigate, to bury. A team of 6 priests entered with picks, salt, and sacred iron. They sealed the basement walls in lead and laid 12 iron nails around the foundation, each blessed with a different rite of excommunication. Only one priest came back out, and he never blinked again. Not once. His eyes were sealed open by scar tissue. He died 2 weeks later. His final words, "It sleeps, but not for long. It dreams through the mouths of the broken." But even as the order tried to close the book, others were already turning the page, because deep on the dark web, fragments of Thornhill's original patient recordings began to leak, and that's where we go next. Oh, they weren't supposed to exist. The Thornhill sessions, as they're called now, were supposedly destroyed in the 1930s during the state sanitization mandate, when hundreds of outdated mental institutions were purged of unsound documentation. But 3 reels survived, and not in any archive, not in a museum. They surfaced on a dead forum buried within a Tor network node, listed under the file name Sanguis T13 Final.wav. That's Latin again. Sanguis. Blood, T13, perhaps Thornhill, Section 13. Coincidence? Not likely. The first tape opens with a hum, low, subaudible and throbbing like a living wound. Then a young girl's voice, whispering, singing. The mirror bends, the mirror breaks, the face you see is not what wakes. No context, no introduction. Just that sing-song rhyme, repeated over and over, until her voice begins to stutter, as if something else is trying to speak through her vocal cords. You hear something wet, like water being poured into a skull. A pause, and then, in a voice that doesn't match any human register, "We are through the skin now." The second tape is worse. It's labeled Patient E39, though cross-referencing Thornhill records shows no one with that designation. The audio, it starts in mid-conversation, likely a doctor and a patient. The man speaks calmly, but his questions are repetitive. Do you still see them? Where are they now? What are they telling you to do? The patient answers, but all at once like multiple voices speaking through a single mouth. Male, female, old, childlike, overlapping. Some crying, some laughing, some clicking. Then silence. And then, one clear voice says, "They put her in the walls." There's a bang. The sound of a chair scraping. Running. Then static. But the third tape, it's what made audio techs quit their jobs. It's what got the forum deleted without warning by unknown cyber enforcement just days later. No voices, just a heartbeat. And underneath that beat is a faint chant. The tempo speeds up, reverses, speeds again, until the pulse matches a very specific frequency, one known in experimental neurology as God tone 0.618, a golden ratio harmonic said to cause hallucinations in 11% of listeners. People reported nosebleeds, blackouts, and one man even reported seeing his dead twin brother standing in his hallway hours before the brother actually died in another state. These tapes aren't just records, they're transmissions. Someone, or something, wants to be remembered, and it's not done speaking. Next, we uncover who tried to warn the world, and why no one listened. They called him Edgar Voss, a nondescript man, mid-40s, wireframe glasses, librarian's posture. He worked as a junior records specialist at the Arkham State Archives, the last warehouse of physical Thornhill Hospital documents after its closure in 1926. Voss had no criminal record, no strange affiliations, no personal history of mental illness. But in 1942, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, he set himself on fire in the middle of the Thornhill wing of the archive building, without a single scream. What investigators found in the aftermath still raises questions today. First, the room had no matches, no gasoline, no accelerants of any kind. Just Voss, his melted glasses, and a circle of charred paper, singed black around a boundary that formed a perfect spiral. Inside it, ash and bone. Outside it, untouched paper, not even smoke damage. That should be impossible. Second, before his death, Edgar mailed a single envelope to an obscure post office box in Lansing, Michigan. The box belonged to a reclusive researcher named Harold Quaid, a fringe scholar of psychoacoustic resonance who believed sound could summon or suppress non-physical intelligences. Inside the envelope, a Thornhill patient ledger, a page torn from a diary, possibly Dr. Calder's, and a photo completely black until it was exposed to UV light. Under ultraviolet, a message appeared, handwritten in jittery Latin, Vos non videtis quod audit, you do not see what it hears. Quaid's response? He vanished. Apartment cleared. No records after 1943. Third, the journal page. It wasn't dated, but it referenced session 91, where the attending physician noted, he speaks in silence, he moves through walls, the other children follow him now, even in dreams. I fear it is no longer the child who answers me. And beneath that in red ink was scribbled, the spiral is not a symbol, it is a door. Archivist. It was later discovered that Edgar Voss had been pulling audio transcripts from deep storage, some of which matched the surviving tapes. But the real horror? He wasn't studying them, he was tracking them. Each audio reel had a map drawn on the box, a map that formed a network of spirals spreading out from Thornhill in all directions, as if something was trying to grow. They ruled it a psychotic break, open and shut. But no autopsy was performed, no funeral. And to this day, the fire-resistant circle where Edgar burned is still there, untouched, uncleanable. The floorboards beneath it remain a deep, unnatural black. Some say the spot absorbs light, others say it listens. Next, we travel into the ruins of Thornhill itself, where those who've tried to film inside never came out with working footage. They say silence is golden, but in Thornhill, silence was currency, and it was weaponized. By the turn of the century, the asylum was no longer just a place to contain the mad. It had evolved into something much darker, an experimental ground for controlling the mind itself, and not through medication or therapy, but through ritualized sensory deprivation. Deep beneath the asylum's west wing, sealed behind iron-reinforced doors, were the whisper rooms, soundproof chambers where patients were locked in total darkness and silence for days, sometimes weeks. No light, no sound, no human contact, not even a voice. The doctors called it therapeutic stillness, but staff whispered a different term when no one was listening: soul-breaking. Records show that patients placed in these rooms for more than 72 hours often came out different, not just broken, but blank, their personalities erased, their memories fogged. Some couldn't even recall their own names. Others wept uncontrollably when they saw their own reflections, saying the face in the mirror wasn't theirs. Here's what makes this truly terrifying. One of the lead researchers, Dr. Joseph Hardwell, had previously worked under a little-known military project at West Point involving psychological warfare. He understood, better than anyone, how deprivation could fracture identity. Some of the whisper rooms weren't just empty. Symbols had been carved into the walls, ancient ones, Sigils linked to medieval occult texts and esoteric orders long thought disbanded, and on the stone floor of the central chamber, a circle. Not for safety, but containment. That's not science, that's ritual. Hardwell claimed the silence allowed the deeper mind to emerge, but patients reported hallucinations of voices that weren't theirs, instructions whispered in languages they didn't speak, and visions of a figure behind the silence, a watcher whose presence grew stronger the longer they stayed inside. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? Thornhill wasn't just a hospital. It was a theater of control, a crucible where minds were melted, remolded, and sometimes erased entirely. And the worst part? They were perfecting a process, not to help the broken, but to build something new, something obedient, something empty enough to fill. In 1903, the asylum received a shipment that didn't belong, 3 iron crates, unmarked, delivered under guard from a federal train line. No record of their contents, no explanation in the manifests. But a nurse, Eva Marlene, left behind a private diary that survived long after her disappearance. She wrote, "They told us not to look, but one crate was already pried open when I passed the lower hall. Inside wasn't medical equipment, it was a coffin. Only, it wasn't shaped for a body. It was long, narrow, and it hummed. Hummed, not audibly, but with a kind of pressure in the air, as if the thing inside had a heartbeat that wasn't sound but weight." After those crates arrived, patients began behaving in strange synchrony. Those who had never spoken began to mutter the same phrases at the same hour of the night. He is beneath, he is becoming. Eva documented changes in the staff too. Orderlies who had worked there for years quit overnight, pale and trembling. New ones arrived, men who didn't speak, didn't eat on shift, and refused to make eye contact. One patient, 14-year-old Miriam Cross, drew the same shape over and over in her cell, a circle within a triangle with a single vertical line through its heart. When asked what it meant, she simply said, "That's the door, he's almost through." Who was he? That question wouldn't be answered until a night known only in Thornhill's shadow archives as the Descent, a term scratched into the back of Eva Marlin's last diary entry, dated July 17, 1903. That same night, 3 patients vanished, 2 nurses were found catatonic in the central stairwell, and every mirror in the North Ward shattered simultaneously, despite no signs of an earthquake, tremor, or physical trauma. But the worst detail: security logs for that night are gone, not missing, burned. Someone didn't just want to hide what happened, they wanted it erased. Whatever was in those crates, it wasn't medicine, it wasn't science, it was invitation. Weeks after the night of the Descent, a federal team arrived under the guise of a structural inspection. But these weren't architects or engineers. They were men in charcoal coats, wearing gloves in the summer heat, escorted by armed guards. They spoke to no one. They sealed off Wing C, the oldest part of the asylum, the wing directly above the old foundations, and directly below the tower Miriam Cross had drawn over and over again in her notebooks. Within 48 hours, they demolished it. No salvage, no report, just bulldozers at midnight, leveling a structure that had stood for 80 years. Eva Marlin's final entries suggest this had nothing to do with safety. She believed Wing C was a lid, not a building, a lid to something ancient waiting beneath. According to her notes, some of the original asylum blueprints were borrowed from older structures, European monasteries, even early catacombs. She even traced one symbol found on the basement stonework to an Etruscan tomb seal predating Christ by over 500 years. Why would a psychiatric hospital in rural America have foundations that linked to a lost pre-Christian death cult? And more importantly, why bury it here? Local legend in Flint Hollow spoke of an ancient settlement wiped out by fire and famine long before the town was founded. It was rumored the land had been cursed, that nothing could grow here, that settlers would leave in the night without explanation. Thornhill Asylum was built precisely on that land, not by accident, on purpose. It was never just a hospital, it was a containment site. Eva Marlin's notes mention symbols carved into basement beams, symbols that predated Latin, inscribed by hand, worn smooth by time. She believed they weren't for decoration or faith. They were barriers, and someone, somehow, was trying to break them. The final line of her diary reads, "They've seen the cracks in the lid, and someone is whispering through them." By the fall of 1911, Thornhill Asylum was a ghost of itself. The population had dropped by half, not because patients were discharged, but because they simply disappeared. Ward logs became inconsistent. One entry from October lists room 4B unoccupied, yet the nurse's log for that same day includes medication administered to 4B, female 22, uncooperative. When asked, the staff would shrug. She must have been moved, but no transfer was recorded, no family contact, no forwarding location. Room 4B was empty, and the bedsheets were still warm. Nurses began to complain of long corridors shifting during night rounds, doors appearing where there were none, lights flickering in impossible sequences. One nurse reportedly quit after she opened a locked cabinet and found it filled with teeth. No blood, no notes, just teeth. Human, different sizes. Dr. Wallace, still officially in charge, had become detached, conducting private sessions with patients no one ever saw. He began sketching spiral diagrams and rambling about frequency gates in the human mind. He insisted madness was not a sickness, but a tuning fork, that the truly insane weren't broken. They were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. One attendant reported seeing him place old copper bells in certain rooms, insisting they had to be rung in a precise order to keep the structure from folding inward. He banned mirrors. He ordered the chapel windows blackened. He forbade clocks in the west wing. Then came the incident in the sub-basement. Workers repairing a pipe burst uncovered an old hatch, one that had been bolted, sealed with wax, and circled in rust-colored chalk. It wasn't on any blueprint. No one could say who drew the chalk symbols. But when they pried it open, they found stairs, descending far deeper than any foundation should go. One of the workers ran screaming. The other went down. Only one came back. And he couldn't speak. Not then. Not ever. He gouged out both of his eyes with a cafeteria spoon 3 days later. On the walls of his room, written in ash, were 3 words, "It's already loose." After the sub-basement incident, something shifted in Thornhill. The air grew thicker, like it held memory. Nurses swore they could hear sobbing from empty rooms, not muffled or distant, but as if someone stood behind them, just out of reach. The black mold that had once been an annoyance now spread in patterns, spirals, eyes, and once a perfect human handprint, larger than any adult could make. Then came the mirroring. Patients who had never met began reciting each other's exact dreams. Some shared identical scars they hadn't had the day before. A mute boy started mimicking voices of long-dead residents down to their accents and coughing fits. And then, the song. One by one, patients began humming a low, tuneless melody in unison. Staff tried separating them, sedating them, but the humming would continue, even through clenched jaws and unconscious bodies. A nurse recorded it on a wax cylinder. The cylinder shattered in her drawer overnight. The shards spelled out, "Do not record." Dr. Wallace no longer held staff meetings. He lived in his office, seen only by orderlies who delivered trays of food he never touched. The few times he emerged, he looked withered. His eyes were sunken, his skin loose, as if it were barely clinging to the shape beneath. He'd mutter about the chorus and resonant bodies, and once, to no one in particular, said, "She is becoming." One orderly found a sketchbook left open on Wallace's desk. It showed detailed anatomical drawings of patients, but their insides had been rearranged. Lungs in the pelvis, a heart fused with the throat, pages and pages of imagined surgical notes, ending with the phrase, "To prepare the body for her voice." By now, the local community wanted the asylum shut down, but the town council, already fragile, was plagued by its own horrors: mysterious drownings in shallow creeks, barns filled with animal scay, Elitons arranged in spiral formations, and children claiming they could hear a woman calling from under the fields. One girl drew a picture of Thornhill on fire. When asked why, she replied, "Because that's how you stop her from being born." But by then it was already too late. July 11th, 1906. At precisely 3:06 a.m., every clock inside Thornhill stopped. Not just paused, fused solid, hands bent backwards, gears cracked open like eggshells. At the same moment, the lights exploded in synchronized bursts, showering glass into beds, halls, and the operating theater. Then came the silence. No cries, no footsteps, no wind. Just a low vibration, too deep for the ears but felt in the bones. Patients began to convulse, not violently, ritualistically, as if their bodies were caught in an unseen rhythm. One by one they stood, eyes rolled back, mouths slack, and began walking toward the east wing. Even the paralyzed walked, even the dead moved. They gathered in what had once been the chapel, now defiled, pews smashed, altar scorched, and walls covered in symbols scratched from the inside. There they formed a circle, humming the same tune from before, but now it was fuller, layered, impossibly complex. It sounded like hundreds of voices, but only a few mouths moved. In the center stood Dr. Wallace. He was shirtless, body covered in what looked like burn scars, but if you stared too long, they seemed to writhe, as if the scars were breathing. He spoke only once that night. "We have built the body. Now she will sing." Then the floorboards split open. Black fluid, not blood, not water, something colder than either, rose in a column from the broken earth. The patients knelt in unison. Wallace stepped into it, smiling. As the fluid reached his chest, he whispered, "You promised," a voice louder than God. And then, a scream. It came from the walls, from the floor, from inside every patient's mouth. It was a sound that should not exist, not human, not machine, not natural. Windows imploded outward. Animals up to 5 miles away were later found dead. Eardrums burst. The chapel collapsed. And just like that, Thornhill was empty. No patients, no staff, no bodies. Just an open scar in the earth, and an echo that would not stop. Locals who approached said they could still hear it humming, beneath their feet, behind their thoughts, a tune they could never forget. The investigation that began in Thornhill Asylum's basement never made the front page. That's not an oversight. It was by design. 2 state-appointed officials entered the grounds in late November of 1897. Their visit, prompted by a whistleblower letter that vanished from public records, was supposed to be routine, but they never reached the second floor. Instead, they found themselves diverted, lured into the sublevels, where patients weren't allowed, where doctors denied anything even existed. What they found was not a treatment ward. It was a chamber. The smell hit them first. Copper, sweat, rot. The air was too still, too cold. Then came the marks, symbols carved into the brick walls, floor, even the support beams. Not random, but deliberate, ancient. Not of European origin, not even native symbology. They resembled Proto-Babylonian seals and binding sigils used in forbidden rites. And at the center of the room, a chair bolted to the floor, stained dark, with leather straps broken or torn at the ends. There were no patients in this room. Just recordings, not tapes, but journals filled with detailed transcriptions, sessions with unnamed subjects, each more disturbing than the last. They spoke of forced memory suppression, induced hallucinations, and gate-opening procedures to implant false identities. One subject, known only as Patient 47, wrote, "They've peeled my mind like an onion, and now something else is wearing it." By dawn, one investigator went missing. The other, Arthur Bellows, would resign within 24 hours and never speak publicly again, but a private letter, retrieved posthumously, was found in his attic decades later. In it he wrote, "It was never about curing them. It was about becoming gods, by breaking men and reconstructing them into tools. Thornhill was not an asylum, it was a forge. That single sentence changes everything, and it proves what the government was desperate to hide. They weren't dealing with illness. They were engineering obedience. The kind that doesn't ask questions, the kind that forgets its own past, the kind that worships the system that cages it. And Thornhill was just one node in a much larger network. You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? The question isn't what did they do there. It's how many other places still do it today. They called it a containment breach, but no sirens rang, no reports were filed, no public statement was made. On December 3, 1897, 4 days after the unauthorized investigation, Thornhill Asylum was sealed, not by health authorities, but by a quiet, black-suited team that arrived in unmarked carriages before sunrise. Witnesses described them as neither local nor military, something in between. One groundskeeper said they didn't speak, didn't blink, just walked straight through the fog like they'd done this before, like they knew exactly what they were dealing with. Inside, what remained wasn't just a scene of horror, it was an experiment interrupted. Beds overturned, restraints snapped, walls smeared with indecipherable scrawls, many in blood, some glowing faintly in the dark. The entire west wing had been blackened, not burned. Just wrong, as if reality had wrinkled there and never smoothed back out. And deep in the sublevels, the sigil room described by investigator Bellows had been stripped. No books, no chair, no evidence it ever existed. Except one thing, etched into the wall behind where the chair had once been, in a different hand than any found before, were 6 chilling words. We remember what they made us. No one claimed responsibility for the seal order. The patients were relocated, or so it was said, but records of transfers lead to nowhere. Most of the names disappear completely from state archives after that day. Staff were either dismissed or reassigned under non-disclosure. Some, like Dr. Samuel Vellum, simply vanished. But the locals remember. The screaming that echoed for days behind the sealed doors, the unnatural stillness that fell over Thornhill after, the way animals refused to cross the gate, the fact that to this day, grass doesn't grow near the foundation. The asylum was quietly demolished in 1903. Officially, it was due to structural instability. But the site was never redeveloped, never sold, just left, fenced, guarded, and labeled simply as hazard area, do not enter. They buried the truth. But they didn't kill it, because something was born inside Thornhill, something built from suffering, obedience, and ritual, and they didn't lock it away to protect us. They locked it away to give it time. By the time the first century passed since its sealing, Thornhill's name was barely whispered, even by locals. Maps stopped listing it. Roads leading there became gravel and then dirt, until only footpaths remained. The asylum was erased from public consciousness, but it had never been forgotten by those who had once served within its walls, or by those who still guarded its silence. A confidential memo, intercepted and later leaked in 1974, confirmed something chilling. The Department of Interior Affairs maintained a Category 7 watch on the site. Not for environmental contamination, not for trespassers, but for activity resurgence. What that meant was unclear until 1993. That year, 4 teenagers from nearby Mason Hollow dared each other to enter the property on Halloween night. Only one returned. She was found wandering Route 9 at dawn, barefoot and bloodied, her eyes wide, unblinking, and murmuring the same phrase over and over. They're all standing still now, except the one in the wall. Doctors declared it a psychotic break brought on by trauma, but she bore no physical signs of injury beyond scratches on her arms and one perfectly symmetrical brand on her shoulder, a 6-pointed spiral, just like the ones drawn on the walls of Thornhill decades earlier. She was institutionalized, never spoke again. The other 3, never found. After that, the site was reinforced. Steel fencing, motion detectors, a 24-hour surveillance rotation disguised as wildlife protection. The land remains under federal lock, inaccessible without Level 3 clearance. Yet every few years, a report surfaces, a drone that malfunctions mid-flight, a hiker who wanders too close and claims to hear chanting beneath the ground, unexplained power outages in nearby towns, and always, the birds refusing to nest in trees that point toward Thornhill. What was started inside those walls didn't die. It was designed to endure, even grow. Through belief, through suffering, through whatever ancient pact was made behind blood and sigil. And somewhere beneath that cursed soil, something waits. Not for freedom, not for revenge, but for the moment when someone returns and finishes what was begun. 1997, winter. A deep freeze settled over the valley, colder than any recorded in decades. Locals in surrounding towns called it the Hollow Winter. Pipes burst, roads buckled, and even seasoned farmers claimed their livestock refused to face east toward Thornhill. And yet, the cold didn't touch the asylum grounds. Satellite thermal scans revealed something impossible: consistent internal heat signatures beneath the earth, in perfect geometric patterns. Not random, not geothermal, deliberate. The department called in Dr. Elias Venner, a specialist in anomalous energy events. He was a physicist, but also a folklorist, the kind of man who could speak equations and exorcisms in the same breath. He spent 3 nights inside Thornhill, alone. What he documented, before the footage was confiscated, was chilling. The walls are humming, not metaphorically. Frequencies I've never seen on any scope. They're responding to proximity, to breath, to thought. I think it's feeding on attention. The more you acknowledge it, the stronger it becomes. Venner emerged with a torn coat, missing 3 teeth, and a journal written entirely in mirror script Latin. He never returned, but his last known statement to a colleague still echoes in classified archives. They weren't curing madness in Thornhill. They were farming it. Soon after, Congress quietly reclassified the site as a black access zone, a status shared by only 2 other places in U.S. history. One of them is the Denver International Airport's forgotten sublevels. The other remains redacted. And then came the Thornhill Pulse. On March 21, 1998, seismographs across 5 states registered a subterranean vibration centered directly under the asylum, lasting 6 minutes and 44 seconds. No quake, no explosion, just vibration. Residents nearby claimed they couldn't move during that time, paralyzed by sound, as one described it. Others say they dreamt of the same thing: a door, carved from bone, floating in a room with no floor, and a voice beneath everything whispering, "You are almost ready." Since that day, no one has entered Thornhill and returned whole. The land remains still, guarded, monitored, feared. But Thornhill is not sleeping. It is waiting. For what? That's the question even the silence won't answer. 1999. The Girl in the Cornfield. It began on a Sunday morning. Just 5 miles from Thornhill's perimeter, a 7-year-old girl named Miriam Talbot wandered into her family's cornfield, one that hadn't grown a single crop since the 1980s. The earth had long been considered dead, blighted, barren, unsalvageable. Her parents had given up trying to plant anything. Yet that morning, the field was different. Tall green stalks, fully grown overnight, rustled in the windless air. Dozens of crows sat perfectly still along the edges. No chirps, no movement, just watching. Miriam walked between the rows. Her mother found her 3 hours later, standing in the exact center of the field, holding something wrapped in her jacket. The girl wouldn't speak for nearly 2 weeks. When she finally did, she whispered a single phrase: "The baby was crying, but it's okay now. I buried it like they asked." Authorities excavated the field. They found nothing, until they reached exactly 9 feet deep and hit a hollow space lined with old, decaying stone. Beneath that, a sarcophagus. Not one made of rock, but something that looked like bone fused together with resin and carved with hundreds of tiny names, all written in Old Gothic script, the kind used by European monks in the 14th century. Inside was a small humanoid figure, wrapped in linen soaked in blood and ash. No eyes, no mouth, but hands, long and elegant, placed neatly over its chest. No one knew what it was. The FBI took it. So did DARPA. Then it disappeared from all records. But Miriam changed. Her drawings, once childish and bright, turned into pages filled with black spirals and contorted faces. She spoke less, ate little, refused to sleep in a room with mirrors. On her 8th birthday, she vanished from a locked bedroom with windows nailed shut and 2 cameras monitoring her. In the footage, 1 frame flickered with scent. Attic. When it cleared, she was simply gone. Only one thing was left behind. A crumpled page from her sketchbook. A picture of the Thornhill Asylum, rendered in perfect detail, despite Miriam never having seen it. In the upper corner of the page, written in her careful hand, "She's calling the rest now, and they remember." And so the question returned louder than ever. What exactly is buried beneath Thornhill, and why are children always the first to hear it? 2001, Project Echo Latch. After Miriam's disappearance, Thornhill became the nucleus of a quietly expanding government operation. Project Echo Latch, classified above top secret and overseen by a coalition of intelligence branches that publicly didn't exist. Its alleged purpose? To map psychospatial anomalies across the United States and determine their relation to recurring disappearance zones, regions where time, memory, and biology collapsed under unexplainable phenomena. Thornhill, they discovered, wasn't the only site. It was simply the oldest one still active. Records, long buried under decades of black ink, revealed a chilling detail. Every 21 years, a reset event occurred at Thornhill. Witnesses were erased, buildings restored, soil turned over as if sterilized, new growth flourished overnight. And then, the dreams began again. Testimonies from nearby towns, most never released, spoke of identical nightmares. A woman buried in black silk, whispering in a tongue that made the walls bleed. Rooms where doors opened into the same hallway again and again, even after you walked for hours. Children standing in the cornfields at midnight, humming a melody that made your ears ring for days. And yet, despite dozens of recorded instances, no one ever remembered moving there. Census logs would overwrite themselves. Satellite imagery failed to show construction of buildings locals swore had always been there. Thornhill had become a living paradox, rewriting its own history every generation, drawing in the same people under new names. But what triggered the cycle? That's what Echo Latch was designed to uncover. Their breakthrough came in late 2001, when seismic readings detected a deep subterranean structure beneath the asylum's ruins, so deep it intersected a fault line that shouldn't exist. The readings pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The team sent down a drone. It reached 3.1 miles below the surface, then froze. Its camera showing a vast domed chamber, walls etched with thousands of writhing figures that moved when unobserved. The drone's feed ended with a final phrase, auto-transcribed by its voice module. They were never insane, just listening. The drone never returned. The man who authorized its descent, Dr. Adrian Fenshaw, was found a week later, naked in his backyard, eyes gouged out and mouth stitched shut with black thread. One word was carved into his chest: echoed. What exactly were they echoing? And who or what was listening? 2005. The broadcast, nobody aired. On a cold February morning in 2005, a low-frequency signal was intercepted by a ham radio operator in Winston County, about 20 miles from the Thornhill ruins. The signal pulsed at 19.3 Hz, just below the threshold of human hearing, but the equipment picked it up. The operator, retired technician Marcus Clay, recorded the transmission out of curiosity. When he played it back through a frequency converter, he collapsed. Neighbors said they heard screaming coming through the radio before it shorted out. Marcus survived, barely. He was found with ruptured eardrums, claw marks across his chest, and a deep burn across the back of his neck in the shape of a lattice pattern, the same lattice found in the original blueprints of Thornhill Asylum beneath the floor of Miriam's locked room. The recording? It contained exactly 2 minutes and 43 seconds of audio. It started with children laughing. Then came a female voice, heavily distorted but speaking English. "You told them we were broken, but we were only open." A pause, then the unmistakable click of a reel-to-reel tape machine. The voice returned. "What you buried can bloom. What you locked away remembers the key." What followed was 20 seconds of thumping like footsteps running in circles. Then a door slammed. Then absolute silence. But spectral analysts found that the silence was filled with layered waveforms shaped like human speech, but played backward, slowed down, and embedded into the silence itself. When run through dozens of filters, those hidden voices emerged. They all said the same thing. We were here before the soil, before the name. We were not invited. We remained. No TV or radio outlet ever acknowledged the event. No agency took ownership of the signal. But 2 days after Marcus Clay's incident, a Department of Energy vehicle arrived at his home. His equipment was confiscated, his tapes destroyed. He was taken to an undisclosed rehabilitation center, and when he returned weeks later, he couldn't remember his own name. He would spend the rest of his days walking the town square in silence, writing the same phrase over and over on notebook paper. They're not underground, they're underneath. Not long after, 6 more ham operators across the state intercepted variations of the signal, each shorter, each more fragmented. Then they stopped entirely. But one fragment remained stitched together from all 6. A child's voice whispering, "We never left the rooms. You just stopped looking." 2006. The bones that didn't belong. When the Thornhill site was officially declared condemned and handed over to the State Historical Society for archival preservation, a small, carefully worded line in the transfer report mentioned an ongoing limited forensic excavation. That was a lie. What actually took place was a black bag dig conducted under the supervision of private contractors, none of whom had any visible identification. No media were notified, no permits were issued, and no records were ever made publicly available. But a whistleblower, using the alias GM, leaked internal notes from the excavation team. The notes described unearthed materials that defied standard classification. In total, 67 sets of human remains were found beneath the east wing, buried vertically, head down, legs bound with braided cloth. All 67 skulls had been sawed open, but not surgically. The cuts were erratic, jagged, made with something between a bone saw and a chisel. Most of the brains were missing, but the strangest find was a cluster of bones that didn't match any known human anatomy. One technician's notes read, "No matching vertebral sequence in Homo sapiens or any primate. Extra joints, unfused sternum, socket density is too high, growth rings like trees. This is not possible." They nicknamed the find Subject F, short for false body. The bones were warm to the touch even after removal. When placed under ultraviolet light, the marrow inside the femur pulsed, and when an intern, unknown to the rest of the team, took a sliver of the tissue to a university lab for testing, she went missing 2 days later. The lab was vandalized. Her notes vanished. The only thing recovered was a label on the sample jar, written in her handwriting. This came from something that remembers pain. Not like memory, but like instinct. It doesn't forget what it was. To this day, no institution has claimed custody of Subject F. No museum or academic archive has been able to request access to the remains. But in a 2011 photograph leaked on a now-defunct conspiracy forum, a blurry image showed a crate labeled Thornhill artifacts being loaded into a vehicle with markings matching a private biotech defense contractor, one known to specialize in neuroadaptive warfare. The crate was marked with a phrase burned into the wood: "Return only when the gate is no longer a threshold." What gate? And more importantly, what's on the other side? 2010. The Survivor and the Silence. For years it was believed that no one who stayed at Thornhill longer than 6 months had ever been successfully reintegrated into society. Most either vanished into the mental health system or died under ambiguous circumstances. But in 2010, a single name resurfaced, one that should not have. Eleanor Vespertine, age 76. Formerly registered under a different name in the Thornhill Children's Ward from 1941 to 1944. She'd been reported missing in 1945 after a transfer that was never recorded. Officially, she had no surviving family, no financial records, no employment history. But she was found in a rural hospice in Oregon, living under a pseudonym, suffering from advanced dementia, but with perfect recall of her time at Thornhill. And she was speaking Latin, not liturgical Latin, but a dead dialect, one used in pre-Christian mystery cults. When linguistic experts from a university were brought in, they were stunned to discover phrases that didn't match any known canonical structure. It was invented, but consistent. An organic language, with inflections they described as non-human in origin. When asked how she learned it, Eleanor whispered, "They taught us to pray without gods. We had to say the words backward, so they wouldn't hear." She described rooms with no doors, corridors that changed length depending on how long you held your breath. She spoke of a mirror without reflection in the West Tower that whispered in voices that made your skin bleed. In one session, she began sobbing uncontrollably and muttered a phrase repeatedly that would later be matched to a specific stanza in the Ritual Romanum, but inverted. "The vessel is broken, and so it leaks. They are not cast out, they are spilled." But what broke the case wide open was what happened after her fourth interview. A nurse left Eleanor's room for less than 3 minutes. When she returned, Eleanor was dead. Not from natural causes, but from cranial collapse. Her skull had caved inward, as if something imploded from inside. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, just a faint symbol drawn in condensation on the room's window, a circle with 13 vertical lines through it. That symbol had also appeared long ago, carved into the wooden walls of Thornhill's basement chapel. And here's the thing no one can explain. The hospice had no humidity. It was kept at 12% for respiratory care. There should have been no condensation. The message wasn't written with a finger, it formed itself. In 2013, a team of urban explorers, part of a YouTube channel known for documenting America's abandoned asylums, snuck into Thornhill Hall under cover of night. The building had been condemned for years, fenced off, and declared a structural hazard. But like so many before them, they were drawn to its legend. They expected crumbling walls, graffiti, maybe some rusted medical equipment. They didn't expect to find a trapdoor beneath the nursery floorboards. At first it looked like just another rotted patch of wood, until one of them noticed hand-scratched letters etched around its edges. When the footage was reviewed later, the letters spelled something in a child's handwriting. "Don't follow her voice." The team pried the wood open. Beneath it was a ladder descending into pure darkness. No power, no light. Only a cold draft rising from below, carrying with it the faint scent of flowers and iron. They descended. The footage, still online, though most mirrors have mysteriously vanished, shows a subterranean stone corridor, unlike anything in Thornhill's original blueprints. Arches lined with strange carvings, burn marks on the ceiling, as if something had exploded from beneath. They found a room, empty except for a single iron crib, perfectly preserved in the center. Chains bolted it to the floor. On the back wall, something was painted in what one expert later claimed was cinnabar and oxblood, a forgotten alchemical combination used in medieval binding rituals. It was a symbol again, the circle with 13 lines. One explorer stepped into the room and immediately began to seize. His body writhed violently, and his eyes rolled back as he began screaming in perfect biblical Greek, a language he had never studied. Another camera caught the moment the crib began to vibrate on its own, and then everything went dark. All footage after that point was corrupted fear, less scrambled, timestamps erased. The group was rescued 14 hours later, found unconscious near the main entrance, even though GPS showed them 3 stories underground just minutes earlier. 2 of them recovered. The third never spoke again. And on her arm, someone, or something, had carved the words, "Not buried, waiting." The YouTube channel was deleted. The domain was purchased anonymously. The footage, scrubbed from the internet. But one mirrored clip remains on the dark web. And in its final seconds, just before the feed cuts out, there's one sound no one can explain. A baby crying, from somewhere, deep below. 2 years after the explorers vanished beneath Thornhill Hall, in a quiet suburb of Asheville, North Carolina, an 11-year-old girl named Lila Monroe began drawing things she couldn't explain. It started with scribbles, circles, jagged lines and spirals. Then one night, She sketched out a perfect architectural diagram, down to scale, of Thornhill's underground chamber, complete with dimensions and notations. Her parents, confused, assumed she was just imaginative, but when her father, a retired architect, recognized that her blueprint matched no known building codes or logic, he posted it anonymously to a forum for paranormal investigators. It spread fast. Someone overlaid her drawing onto the known floor plan of Thornhill Hall, and the result was a flawless match, except her version included rooms no one had ever found, symbols no historian could decipher, and most disturbingly, a staircase leading farther down. Lila claimed she'd seen it all in her dreams. "There's a lady in the white room," she said in an interview. "She shows me things. She says the house is alive and it's remembering." What shook investigators most was that Lila had never heard of Thornhill. No one in her family had any connection to Tennessee, yet she spoke of the crying crib, the mouth below the cellar, and the boy who wears no eyes. A private team of researchers reached out to the Monroes. They ran EEG scans while Lila slept, hoping to catch a dream state anomaly. What they recorded still defies analysis. Brainwave activity so intense it resembled a seizure combined with lucid dreaming, and a disembodied voice captured on multiple devices whispering, "The foundation is blood, the blueprints are memory, she has awakened." When Lila awoke, she said nothing. She simply handed them a final drawing, a room with 13 mirrors, all shattered, except one. Inside the unbroken one, a woman, with no face, holding a baby. Days later, Lila vanished from her room. No sign of forced entry. No scent, no trace, no prints. Only a trail of dirt leading from her bed to her closet, where carved into the wooden door were the words, "Returned to sender." Authorities ruled it a runaway. But those who knew the signs, those who had seen Thornhill's symbols before, believed differently. The house was expanding, not physically, but through thought, through dream, through the minds of the receptive. And Lila, she wasn't the first. She would not be the last. By now, the whispers about Thornhill Hall had bled far beyond Tennessee. Online message boards, once dismissed as digital folklore hubs, were now flooded with testimonies, dream diaries, blueprints, old photographs, EVP recordings, and in one dark, hidden corner of the internet, a private encrypted forum called Sealing Mouth gained attention. It claimed to be a support group for survivors, but not of abuse, not of trauma in the traditional sense, of the house. Members spoke in coded language, terms like plaster veins, the mirrored lung, and ceiling births. One consistent symbol kept emerging, a cross with a crescent halo, eerily similar to a marking found carved into the walls beneath Thornhill's foundation decades earlier. In mid-2016, a cyber forensics team infiltrating deep web cult activity stumbled onto the forum. One analyst, a woman named Yara Kim, posed as a member and gained access to restricted chat logs. What she found rattled her to her core. Transcripts of nightly shared dreams among members, blueprints being drawn identically by users across the globe with no collaboration, mentions of the mother in the wall, the same entity Lila Monroe described before disappearing. Yara traced several IPs. They weren't fake. Members were scattered across the US, Europe, even Japan and Argentina, all with one thing in common. They had either visited, studied, or dreamt of Thornhill Hall. One chat log stood out. A user named MirrorBirth33 posted, "Tonight I return. I've gathered 13. We will enter through the chapel ceiling. It's thinnest there. We will feed her. She is so very hungry." Then nothing. That same night, police in rural Tennessee responded to a disturbance near an abandoned church just 11 miles from Thornhill's ruins. Inside, they found 13 candles, a circle of salt, and in the center, a child's rocking chair spinning by itself, writ 10 in dried blood on the ceiling. "We've been living in the attic of her mind. Now she opens the door. No bodies, no footprints, only 13 pairs of shoes placed carefully in a ring around the chair." Yara Kim never logged back into the forum again. A week later, her apartment was found empty. Bed made, food in the fridge, coffee cup still warm. But on her wall, in black charcoal, I saw the blueprints in my dream. They're in me now. The FBI still has a task force assigned to tracking remnants of the Sealing Mouth group. Their last known communication came in late 2019, a single photo uploaded anonymously to a dark web image host, showing a cracked mirror in a dirt floor room. Behind it, a girl's handprint. By now, Thornhill Hall is nothing but overgrown soil and memories that refuse to fade. The town of Wicklow Ridge has long since been abandoned. Nature has reclaimed it, trees breaking through cracked pavement, ivy strangling what's left of old road signs. But something lingers. In September of 2023, an architecture graduate named Remy Caldwell began researching cursed structures for his thesis, titled Haunted Symmetry, the Language of Possessed Architecture. His obsession led him down the familiar rabbit hole. He read about the missing children, the sealing berths, the mouth of Thornhill. He scoured blueprints, journal entries, and drone footage, and finally, he found it. One document, a blueprint not drawn but carved, into the underside of a barn's floorboard near the ruins. The lines didn't make sense, they defied logic. The angles were mathematically impossible, folding in on themselves like a Mobius strip of architecture. He traced them by hand. That's when the migraine started. Then the sleepwalking. Then the dreams of hollow walls and soft breathing from the ceiling above. He tried to quit the project, threw out his notes, burned the printouts. But one day, he opened his laptop and his screen displayed a blinking cursor and a single word typed in white. Blinking. Draw. And so he did. For hours, then days, he filled pages. Not with conscious effort, but as if the lines were pulling themselves from him, as if his hand were just the tool for something else's will, something older, something hungry. On October 13, 2023, his apartment neighbors called in a noise complaint. Strange chants, metallic scraping. When police broke in, they found the walls covered in architectural renderings, none matching any human standard of design. The ceiling was gone. In its place, an open maw, lined with teeth made from the house's own rafters, the floor curling. Up like a tongue, the room swallowed inwards. Remy Caldwell was never found. Only his final page, pinned to the center of the room with a nail from Thornhill's original beams. It read, "She's no longer in the ceiling. We built her a door. You stepped through it the moment you looked up." And then the last line, handwriting shaky, desperate, as if written in the final moment. "Don't dream in rooms with ceilings.